Good morning to all of you, especially those in your homes listening to our message, hopefully here on Sunday or whenever. And to all of those who have gathered here with us today. We're so thankful to have all of you here to hear the living Word of God. Today, of course, our focus is upon having a pure heart. So let's prepare our hearts with a prayer of preparation. Lord, we're so thankful again to have this opportunity to review your Word and to explore more deeply the meanings of it. Help us today to understand a little more clearly how we can have the blessed experience of a pure heart in our Christian lives. Teach us the ways of Jesus and how we might thereby learn from Jesus how we too could have this same pure heart. For we pray it in Christ's name. Amen. You know, sometimes we go to these artisanal fairs where a lot of people are walking around, and always it seems like there's a sketch artist there that is sketching portraits of people. And I always like to watch that for a few moments. It's amazing how these artists can catch the likeness of a person and do it very quickly. It would take me forever and it wouldn't look like that person at all. Well, I hope this series of messages that I'm giving to you on the bliss of Christian living is like a sketch artist. I hope by now you're being able to see more clearly what a Christian really looks like, what they really appear to be, the kind of blissful life they have. They're the kind of person that is not strong-spirited in the human way. They're humble people. They're people who mourn over the condition of the world today. They're people who mourn over the human condition. They're people who realize just how sinful we all are. And they are people who do not fight evil with evil, but contentedly accept all things coming from God in a meek way. And likewise, they hunger and they thirst to live the God-like life of love, self-sacrificing, self-giving, merciful love. That's what they look like. And in addition to that, they show that in the mercy that they give to others, the unexpected and undeserved love that they share with everyone in the world. That, I hope, is the portrait that you're beginning to see, because that's what we've learned over the last 5 weeks of our studies on this bliss of the Christian life. But today there's one more dimension that we add to it, and that's the dimension of the pure heart. They are pure-hearted persons. Persons whose heart has in it nothing but this love for others. Nothing but this love that is given to all people regardless, whether they deserve it or don't deserve it, whether they expect it or don't expect it. The Christian is that person who has that pure heart, that never asks any questions, never condemns and never judges, just simply loves continuously out of the purity of the love that is in their heart. This is why Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." So today I'd like to explore that a little bit. And of course, the first question that I think we must ask, just so we think upon it again, and that is, how can we have this pure heart? We pray, "Create in me a clean heart, O God." We sing that. We ask for that. But what can we do besides just pray for it? One of the things I firmly believe in is that we are called to be disciples of Christ. I really believe in that. Somehow we got away from that idea of discipleship. I don't know when it happened. I don't know why it happened. But I've seen it in the Christian faith. We don't talk about that word so much anymore. Being disciples. Well, I think that's what we're called to be. And what does that mean? It means that we discipline ourselves to live the Christian way. That's what the word disciple means. Someone who disciplines themselves in the way of Christ, disciplines themselves in the way of Jesus. And that's especially important today on this topic of having a pure heart. Because the only way we'll ever have a pure heart is if we engage in two major disciplines. These two major disciplines were no secret and are no secret. Jesus mentioned them several times, and especially in the end of the gospel we hear them when he is preparing his disciples for their life without him. And he says to them, basically, there are two disciplines that will enable you to be a pure-hearted person all your days. And these two disciplines are watch and pray. Watch and pray. We often just skip over that. Well, that's nice. Watch and pray. No, that's how we have a pure heart. It's when we learn how to watch and we learn how to pray. But of course, the question arises, watch what and pray for what? Well, that's what I'd like to explore with you just a bit here today. This idea, first of all, of the discipline of watching. Oh, this is such an important discipline in our Christian lives. But we just haven't learned how to do it many times. And we don't really understand what it means to watch in the spiritual Christian way. Well, I'm reminded of an experience that I think kind of illustrates what this watching is like. It's an experience I had early in our ownership of this condo we have down in Salinas. We'd been there only a little while when the 4 air conditioners failed. That's not nice in Salinas in a hot time and a humid time. And we were there in February, which is the hottest and the most humid time. So we had no cool air. Well, finally I got the number of an AC company there in town. I called them to come out right away. They got there in 2 days later, which I thought was good comparing to what I've seen other days. But anyway, these 2 young air conditioning technicians showed up at our door, and they were carrying a little toolbox, only one toolbox. Not what I'd been used to in the United States with this massive truck and all the gauges and all the stuff that fixes the AC. One little toolbox. And I showed them where the AC was, and I explained to them, no frio air, no cold air. They understood what my problem was. And so they opened up the little toolbox. And I could see in that little toolbox, there were 3 things in there. A hammer, a little bottle of something, and a wrench. I thought, well, that's impressive. So they took the hammer and they went around to each unit, tap, 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 all around, hitting it this way, hitting it that way. Went back in to check the air, nothing coming out cool. So I thought, well, I'll just go back to the living area and wait, see what happens. And eventually the little man come back out and he says to me in Spanish, what I thought I heard him say was, "Tiene jamón?" And that's what I thought he said, which means, do you have any ham? And I thought, maybe it's lunchtime. He wants to eat something. But I didn't understand. And finally I understood he was saying, tiene jabón, which is soap. Soap. Do you have any soap? Well, I thought maybe he was finished and wanted to wash his hands, he said. So I went and got him a bar of soap. No. Para los platos. I want to wash the dishes. And I'm like, okay, you want to wash the dishes? That's fine. I'll get you some dishwashing soap. So I got him some dishwashing soap, and he went back to where the air conditioning units were. So I walked back, curious as to what in the world was he doing. And so I watched as he showed, I guess me, how he was going to fix our AC. He took that soap and he put it on each of the air conditioning lines, and then he had a little cup of water that he had gotten, and he put the water on there, and he began to spread it out on the line so that there was this very thin film of soap on each line. And then he and his partner sat there and they watched. And they just sat quietly, patiently, watching. watching. And all of a sudden, one of them said, "Ahi!" And if you looked closely enough, there were little bitty bubbles coming out of that line. And that's when they discovered where the leak was in the line. And that's what that bottle was in their toolbox. It was a thing they used to prepare the leak in the line. And they did that for all 4 air conditioning. And it took them 4 or 5 hours of patiently watching those lines, looking for that little bubble, and then wiping it all off and cleaning it, and then making sure that they got each of those sealed up. And sure enough, we had cold air and have had it ever since for many years now with no trouble. That's what watching is all about. In the spiritual realm, we have to learn how to watch our hearts. We have to learn to watch our hearts with the same eagle-eye patience that those air conditioner technicians used on the air conditioning line. And what are we looking for? We're looking for those places where our ego has punched a hole in our hearts and our ego is bubbling out. We have to look at our hearts and see, oh, here is some anger bubbling out. Oh, here is some selfishness bubbling out. Oh, here is some impatience bubbling out. Here is some unkindness bubbling out. Here is some vainglory bubbling out. You see, this is what it means to watch in the spiritual Christian life. It is to reflect upon your heart and see where your self-ego has punched a hole in your heart, and now your selfishness is leaking out and causing you to lose your cool, so to speak. And in addition to that, have no more pure, integrity in your heart. No longer is your heart purely filled with love. Now it's filled with these aspects of yourself. It's filled with these things that you want to add to your love or take away from your love. It's all of these pollutions that have come into your heart, that have poked these holes in it, that is causing that worldliness to come back into your heart, and it's causing you to act in a worldly way or to act in a mixed heart way. No longer a pure heart. You have to identify these things. You have to reflect upon your heart. You have to see where yourself is breaking through into this heart that was nothing but love, but is now mixed with all of the humanness that you oftentimes experience. And once you see it, then God can do something about healing it, you see. But you've got to see it. If you don't see that in your heart, God can't do much about it. But if you see it, then God can fix the leak. God can fix the hole. And you can find yourself with a pure heart again. You can find yourself no longer being a mixed heart person that loves but with condition, that loves but with vengeance, that loves but with revenge or whatever else it is you have in your heart. No, now you have a pure heart again because you have seen where the leak is and you have asked God to patch that leak, you see. This is how we discover a clean heart within us, by watching. And it takes patience. I remember those little guys watching for an hour until they finally saw the little bubble come. It's not something you can just do quickly. And many times when people reflect upon their lives, they don't reflect for very long. But if you sit there long enough and think about your actions, think about what you said, not what somebody else said. Everybody always wants to say, oh, but they said this, or oh, but they did that, or oh, blah, 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 blah. No, we're not called to look on somebody else's lines and see where the leak is. It's our lines that we need to deal with. And that means we need to look and see where is the plank in our own eye and not worry about the splinter in somebody else's eye. It's that hole in our heart that we need to watch for, because if we see it, God can heal it. But if we don't know about it, it's very difficult for a God to heal it. So the reflection upon our own heart is a very important discipline. We need that in our disciplined life as Christians. That's part of what it means to be a disciple. It means to be someone who watches your heart, constantly looking for where that selfishness is leaking out. Well, that's one of the disciplines. Watch. But the second discipline is as important, if not more important. And that is to pray. Of course, all Christians know they should pray, and everybody believes that they should pray. And they pray for all kinds of things. But that is the issue. Jesus did not say, pray for this or pray for that. He said, pray. Left it that way. Pray. Well, if you're not praying for something, then what in the world are you doing, we might say. What does it mean just to pray? How can you just pray without praying for something? Well, that's what Jesus meant, and there is a way to do that. It's a discipline in the Christian life. To pray is to connect to God. It is a connection with God. That's what it is. To pray is a connection with God. If you're not connected to God, then it doesn't make any difference what you ask for. It doesn't make any difference what you say. It just doesn't work. The connection is not there. Pray is to make the connection, to make it solid, to make it good, and therefore you can receive into your hearts and into your minds the pure love of God. But if your connection is faulty, if you don't have a good connection, it won't work. To pray is to have a good connection with the love of God first, before you ask for anything else. You don't just rush in and sit down and start asking and asking and asking without hooking up first and making sure that you've got a good connection so that you get a pure flow of God's love into your heart. The discipline is getting that connection. That's what it means to pray. Now, to pray for this and that's another matter. But to pray is to have that good connection. And it reminds me of another experience that happens here in Cuenca quite a bit, and probably has happened to you. Maybe not. Maybe you've been one of those fortunate people that has never had this happen to you. But we have had it happen, and that is where, all of a sudden, because there's some problem in our building with the water supply, they turn off the water. I don't know if you've ever had that done to you in your building or your house. But when the city or whoever it is turns off the water, then you got no water. And you have to just survive until the water comes back on. This happens in our building quite frequently, more so than I would really like for it to happen. But nonetheless, it's a common experience. The water's turned off, and there you are. But the real problem is when they turn the water back on. You would think that's not a problem. How could that be a problem? Well, here's what happens, at least in our building, and maybe not in yours, but in our building it happens like that. You get the word that the water's turned on. You say, oh, fine. So you go over to the sink and you turn on the faucet, and here comes this nice little water out into your sink, and it's all nice. Except all of a sudden it goes, spit, bam, boom! Because of all the air in the line. And if you have a shallow sink, it's all over your floors, on your feet, it's on your shirt sometimes. I remember one time that happened. We were getting ready to have a chorale concert. It was the day that we were going to have it, and they turned off the water in our building. But later on, they turned it back on. And here I was. We were getting ready to leave. We were in a hurry to go, but we needed to fill up our water bottles because you got to stay hydrated when you sing a chorale concert. So I took both of my water bottles. Now, you have to understand, I had just gotten dressed and ready for the chorale. I had on my tuxedo, my fine French cuff shirt, my little black bow tie, and I took my little bottle and I held it up to the sink and I turned it on and it started to fill up, but then all of a sudden, boom, bam, splash! All over my nice French white shirt and coat. Well, there wasn't much you could do except to get the paper towels and start trying to dry yourself and let that thing run, let it spit, let it do all the things it has to do, because you knew that if you waited just long enough, finally it would calm down and all the air would get out of the line, and you could have this nice flow of water. So I waited patiently, spit, and eventually it calmed down, and it was a pure, beautiful stream of water. I filled up our bottles, and we rushed off to the concert, and we got there in time. But the reason I'm reminded of that is because oftentimes in our prayer life, we have to wait. We have to wait for the love to come. It's not automatic. Many times we are filled with all kinds of worries and concerns and difficulties in our lives, and we start to pray and we haven't calmed our minds down, and it's still spitting and sputtering and all kinds of things going on in there. We don't have a good connection to God's love. And we start talking about all the things that are bothering us and all the things that we're afraid of and all the things we'd like to see done. We're just like that faucet that's just spitting out all kinds of stuff that really has nothing to do with anything. There's no pure, continuous love coming through. That's because our connection hasn't made real good contact yet. So part of the discipline then of being a Christian is learning how not only to watch your heart to see where the ego is breaking through, but it's also a very important thing to wait until your mind and heart have calmed down, all the air's out of the line, so to speak, and you're beginning to receive that feeling of pure, unconditional love that is God. When you got that kind of purity coming through, when you know that you're now in the presence of God with no interruptions, with nothing broken, it's a pure stream coming to you. When you've made that kind of a contact, then you are in prayer. Now, what you ask about, talk about, say about, that's another thing. But when you make that connection, then you are in prayer. And you know you're in prayer because the stream is pure. Because the stream is uninterrupted. Because the stream is coming in loud and clear. And you feel nothing in your heart but love. Nothing in your heart but the love of God. When you are at that stage, then you can start talking about your requests to God and what you would like to ask about or talk about. But don't do that while the water is still spitting and spurting and going all over the place. Wait until the connection is solid. And then you can move forward. That's how you have a pure heart. Because then your heart is calmed down. And your heart is at peace. And your heart is at joy. And you are filled with love. And it's much more easier to hear God in that state of mind and heart than it is in a spitting and sputtering state of heart. It's much easier to have a pure motivation in your actions and a pure motivation in your words when you have calmed down and waited for the connection to the love first. Many people pray asking for the love to come later. That doesn't help you have a pure heart right now. To have a pure heart right now, you need to have a good connection right now. And that's part of the discipline of having a pure heart, is learning how to wait patiently for love to come. So basically, both of these disciplines are about waiting. One, you're watching and waiting to see where your flesh is breaking into your spiritual life so that God can heal that. And secondly, you're waiting to the time when you finally have a good, full connection with God's love. These are the two disciplines that we need to practice every day. And when we do, we will have a pure heart in our words and our actions. But now, there's one more question. And that is, if we do that, if we do these disciplines, and we have a pure heart, what then is the bliss? How do we experience the bliss of a pure heart? What's that like? Because, you see, every one of these statements we've looked at recently always end with a bliss, a thing that is received. And in this particular one, we're told that blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Oh. That makes a very interesting statement. What in the world can it mean to see God? If you have this pure heart, you have this bliss of being able to see God. But what does that mean? How does that feel? What's it like to see God? You see, that's the reward of the pure heart. Well, I've tried to think of different ways to explain it, and I've got so many I don't know which one to choose. But the one I've chosen is the most recent one. I was so proud of this. About 3 days ago, I think it was 3 days ago, I won the first game I ever won against my computer chess on the Grand Master level. I must have played 100 or 200 games and lost every one of them. Now you think, oh, well, that's a lot of games, Pastor. That's what you do all week long, sit there and play chess for 200 games. Each game lasts about 5 minutes. Or 10, maybe, if I'm really working hard. The computerized chess doesn't beat around the bush. They just defeat, 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 defeat. Well, as a matter of fact, when I played that game, I felt like, and I know this is crazy, but I felt like the computer had a personality and felt sorry for me. Because I saw it make a move that made no sense, and it was like, you did that on purpose, didn't you, computer? You just want me to feel better. Probably not. But anyway, of course, to go on to become a Grand Master, you have to win 3 games in a row. It'll probably not happen in my lifetime, but anyway, I'll keep working on it and see what comes up next. But the point is that the feeling I had, because what I had done in that game was I had participated in perfection. You don't get to do that too often in life, where every move was perfect, every strategy was exact. And that's why I won. I had participated in perfection. I had actually played the way you're supposed to play if you're going to defeat the Grand Master. And it was an exhilarating feeling. I went out and told Rebecca and other family members about it. They didn't seem too impressed. But I was exhilarated. I had just played the perfect game. It was amazing. And the reason I use that illustration is because when you have a pure heart, it's like playing the perfect game. Whatever it was you did, whatever it was you said, was perfect in that moment and in that time. Not to say that you're going to do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You're going to try, but not to say that you're going to do it. But when you did it, there's nothing like participating in perfection. And when it says, we shall see God, I think that is what it means. We shall see what perfection is like. God is perfection. God's love is perfect. God's life is perfection. And to participate in that life is to participate in perfection, even if it's only for one day, one time, one moment. But participated in it, and it gave you joy, and it gave you peace, and it was wonderful to see God in your actions. We talk a lot about God lives in us, God is within us, we follow God, we love God, but when you actually see yourself living like God, there's nothing like that, nothing like it. It really, really invigorates you. It's one of the great blisses of the Christian life, to be able to see yourself participating in perfection. Well, I would like to share with you a few more little thoughts about that, about what it's like, what happens when you experience that. When you experience that perfection, and you do something. Maybe you make a sandwich for the poor, or maybe you say a kind word to somebody who needs some kindness. Or maybe you give a little hope to someone. Or maybe you visit the sick. Or whatever it is you do, and you participate in that perfection, and you feel the glory of the moment that you feel God in you, and you see God in you, and you see God in the actions and words that you speak. What does that do to you? It changes your life. It's one of the greatest blisses of the Christian life. It changes you entirely. What do I mean by that? First of all, what I mean by that is once you've experienced that perfection, all your past failures fade away. Do you think I remember those 100 games I played against the chess computer anymore? I don't remember one of them. The only game I'm ever going to remember is that game that I won. That's the only one I'm going to remember. All my past failures at beating that game, that chess game, have passed away because I have now experienced and seen what perfection is like. This is what happens to us. All your failures to be perfect, all your failures to do what you should do, all your failures to love as you should love, if you have loved today, all that past goes away. It goes away because you've now seen the potential you have to do love, to be love, to say love. And so all of that passes away. And you're free from it. We call that the forgiveness of sins. That's what we call it in Christianity. What it means is all your past failures are forgotten. The only thing that's important is when are you going to win again? When are you going to be perfect again? When are you going to do another thing for love? You see, it's the only thing that matters anymore. That's one of the things that happens to you when you participate in perfection. And another thing that happens is your view of life changes. Before I won that game, I was real doubtful that I could ever win against the Grandmaster computer. I was real doubtful, very, very doubtful about that. But once I won, all the doubt went away. I may not beat that machine again for another year, but I will beat it again. I know I will. I know I will. Why? Because I've already done it once. You see, this is what happens to you in the Christian life. Once you've given a little love, once you've participated in a little mercy, once you've seen that you can do it, once you've done it, it convinces you, I can do it again. And I can keep on doing it. And one of these days, I'm going to put several strings of mercy and love together so that almost a whole day I participated in that, you see. It lifts up your confidence when this happens. And it makes you much more able to believe you can be like Jesus. You can be like Christ. You can be like God. Because you've already experienced it once. Why not experience it again and again and again and again until your whole life begins to glow with it, you see. That's what happens. That's the bliss of the pure heart, you see. And then the last thing that happens is that it encourages you, it enlightens you to never go back to the impure life again. You see? In other words, once you have had a victory, you don't want to ever go back to that attitude that says, I'm just a human, I just cannot live like God, I just cannot do it. Or you want to go back to that old human way of living. No, once you've tasted that the Lord is good, once you've tasted that the life of love is what it's all about, once you've tasted that, you're encouraged to never go back again. So it's the greatest bliss of all the Christian forms of life is when we are able to participate in perfection. When we're able to participate in the perfection of being love to somebody, being care to somebody, being help to somebody, unconditionally, undeservedly, unexpectedly, nothing but pure love. And that comes from a pure heart. Well, in conclusion then today, I would end with a little story about a plumber. It seems like I'm on this plumber air conditioning theme today. But in Houston, I knew what I consider to be the greatest plumber there ever was. His name was Paul. And of course, in those days, I managed, I don't know, my company managed 300 properties, 400 properties. So we were always in need of a plumber to fix the problem. And we would call all kinds of plumbers to come out, whoever was available. Half the time they would fix it, and then it would break the next day or whatever. But when we came upon a really hard problem, everybody in the office knew, call Paul. Because nobody's going to fix it except him. And we had a problem with a country property. It was on a well and a septic tank. And the problem was in the house, they were getting nothing but brown water coming out of the faucets, which nobody wanted to drink brown water. It was not a good thing. It made it hard to sell that particular property. And all these plumbers went out and did all kinds of things, and nothing worked. We still had brown water coming out of the faucet. And so, call Paul. He was expensive. We'd get him out there and see what is wrong. He was the kind of a plumber that was a genius, actually. And the way he did these things were amazing. And I went with him, of course. I made the time because I always wanted to learn how he did what he did and what he understood. And he came out and he checked out all the water, yep, brown water, no problem about it. He said, but let's go to the bathroom. So we went to the bathroom, and he went to the toilet, and he looked in the toilet, and he flushed the toilet. And when he flushed it, he put in a piece of toilet paper, and he watched it. And he did this about 15 or 20 times, and just sat there watching the toilet paper go round and round and round and round. And finally says, I can see the problem. I said, oh, well, good. I'm glad you can. And so he went out into the backyard. It was a huge country property. And he walked about 50 yards out there. And he looked down and he said, here's where we need to dig. This is where the problem is. Somehow he knew by the speed and the rotation of the toilet paper exactly how far out the line was stopped up. And he knew exactly where to start looking for that. Most plumbers would have had us dig up 1,000 feet of line and replace all of it. But he went out there and he dug up that one area, and sure enough, there it was where the two lines, the sewer line and the freshwater line, went over each other, and there was a leak, and it was all coming together. And he fixed the entire problem, and we had clear water again. But it's what he said to me at the end as he was leaving that day. He said to me, listen, clear water never happens by accident. You got to have knowledge of where the leaks are, and you got to have a good connection. Well, I can't think of a better way to say it when it comes to a pure heart. Being a preacher of the gospel is like being a plumber. You don't have a pure heart by accident. It never happens by accident. It happens because you know where the leak is and your connection is good. Then you have that pure heart. And the water that flows out of you is a pure, unadulterated, non-contaminated love of God for all. So it's absolutely true what Jesus said a long time ago. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Amen.